Chicago, Illinois, 1948. Michael Mike Donnelly sat in the control booth of WCFL Radio, Chicago's premier AM station, watching the clock tick toward the 6 p.m. news broadcast. His hand rested on the transmitter controls, ready to cue the announcer precisely at 18. Not 18:01, not 17:59, exactly on time. The station manager called him the most reliable operator in Chicago. Never missed a cue, never botched a frequency, never transposed numbers. Perfect execution every time. On the wall above his equipment hung a small bronze medal. Visitors occasionally asked about it. Bronze Star, Donnelly would say. D-Day, radio operations in Normandy. Must have been a hero. Donnelly would smile thinly and return to his work. He never elaborated, never mentioned what he'd actually done to earn that medal, because the truth was complicated. The announcer's voice came through his headphones. This is WCFL Chicago, 6 o'clock news with John Cameron. Donnelly's hand moved to the transmitter control. His finger hovered over the switch. For a fraction of a second, he hesitated, a ghost of memory from 4 years ago when his fingers had hovered over different controls, preparing to transmit coordinates that would determine who lived and who died. He pressed the switch. The transmission went out perfectly, as always, but every time he remembered the one transmission that hadn't been perfect, the one that should have killed 127 men, the one that saved them instead. Part 1, May 28, 1944. England Private Michael Donnelly stood at attention in the radio tent at Upottery Airfield, home to the 101st Airborne Division's 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. Captain Richard Wilson, the battalion communications officer, was conducting final inspections before the invasion of Europe. "Donnelly," Wilson said, checking his clipboard, "you're my primary radio operator for the jump. SCR 300 backpack set. Your job is to maintain contact with battalion headquarters and coordinate artillery support fire missions once we're on the ground." "Yes, sir." Wilson looked up. "This isn't like exercises. In combat, you'll be calling fire missions with real shells landing on real people. One wrong number in those coordinates and you're dropping 105 for a high explosive on friendlies instead of Germans. Understand?" "I understand, sir. I don't make mistakes." It wasn't arrogance. It was fact. Donnelly had graduated top of his class at Signal School at Camp Crowder, Missouri. Perfect scores on radio operation, Morse code, frequency management, and coordinate translation. In 6 months of training exercises in England, he'd called 37 practice fire missions. All 37 had been executed perfectly. Wilson nodded. "I chose you because of that record, but out there," he gestured vaguely toward the south, where France waited across the channel. "Out there, conditions aren't perfect. Radios get damaged. Interference happens. You might be cold, wet, scared, exhausted. That's when mistakes happen." "I won't make mistakes, sir." "Everyone makes mistakes eventually, Donnelly. The trick is not making the kind that kills people." That night, Donnelly lay in his bunk, thinking about Wilson's words. Around him, dozens of paratroopers tried to sleep, but the tent buzzed with nervous energy. Some wrote letters. Others checked equipment for the 100th time. Private Eddie Morrison, a rifleman from Detroit, sat on the next bunk cleaning his M1 Garand. "You nervous, Mike?" "No." "Bullshit. Everyone's nervous." "I'm not nervous about the radio work. That part I can control." "And the jumping out of airplanes part? Getting shot at part?" "That I'm nervous about," Donnelly admitted. Morrison laughed. "At least you're honest. Hey, you really never make mistakes? Like Wilson said?" Donnelly thought about it. "Not with radio operations. I've always been good with numbers, frequencies, coordinates. It's like mathematics. Either you get it right or you don't. There's no middle ground. What if you do screw up? Then people die. No pressure though, right? Right, Donnelly said, but the weight sat heavy on his chest. Part 2, June 5th the 6th, 1944, The Jump. The C-47 transport aircraft carrying Donnelly and 35 other paratroopers from Easy Company crossed the Normandy coast at 01:15 hours on June 6, 1944. The night was supposed to be clear. It wasn't. Cloud banks obscured the ground, and German anti-aircraft fire lit the sky like deadly fireworks. Donnelly sat with the SCR-300 radio strapped to his back. The unit weighed 38 pounds with the full battery, basically carrying a second person on your back while jumping from an airplane. The radio was secured in its canvas case, but Donnelly worried about damage during the landing. "Stand up, hook up!" The jumpmaster's commands rang through the aircraft. German flak burst near the plane. The C-47 lurched violently, throwing paratroopers against each other. Donnelly grabbed the static line to steady himself, feeling the SCR-300 shift on his back. "Go, go, go!" Donnelly shuffled forward in the stick of jumpers and threw himself into the night. The parachute deployed. 1 second of terror, then the jerk of the risers, then floating in darkness with tracer rounds arcing through the sky and explosions blooming orange below. He couldn't see the drop zone, couldn't see other paratroopers, just darkness, clouds, and the rushing sensation of falling toward enemy-occupied France. The ground came up fast. Donnelly hit hard, rolling in the prescribed manner, but the landing was rougher than any training jump. He came down in the middle of a hedgerow, the notorious Norman bocage, ancient earthen walls topped with thick vegetation that divided every field into a natural fortress. The SCR-300 slammed against his back, driving the wind from his lungs. He lay gasping, taking inventory. No broken bones. Parachute tangled in the hedgerow above him. Radio still strapped to his back, but the antenna had caught on branches during descent. Donnelly cut away from his parachute and crawled to the base of the hedgerow. He carefully removed the SCR-300 and inspected it by feel in the darkness. The canvas case had protected the main unit, but the long antenna, the AN-131A 8-section flexible whip that normally extended 10 feet 8 inches, was bent at an angle where it had struck a tree branch. He tried to straighten it. The antenna bent back into shape, but there was a weak point in the metal. Not ideal, but functional. He extended it fully, and it locked into position. The radio itself powered on when he tested it. Green glow from the vacuum tubes visible through the inspection ports. Relief washed over him. The SCR-300 worked. He could do his job. Around him, the sounds of battle echoed through the Norman countryside. Gunfire, explosions, aircraft engines. But here, in this hedgerow, it was momentarily quiet. Donnelly checked his map and tried to determine his location. Impossible in the darkness. He had no idea where he was. The drop had scattered paratroopers across miles of terrain. He could be anywhere. A cricket clicked nearby, the brass signaling device paratroopers carried to identify each other. Donnelly pulled his own cricket and clicked twice. 2 clicks answered. "Flash," a voice whispered, the challenge word. "Thunder," Donnelly responded, the password. 2 figures emerged from the shadows. Both wore the distinctive M1942 jumpsuit and carried M1 rifles. Easy Company, judging by the unit patches barely visible in the darkness. "You got a radio?" one of them asked. "Yes, SCR-300. "Thank God. Lieutenant Clark is gathering people 2 hedgerows over. We're trying to figure out where the hell we are." Part 3, June 6, 1944, 02:30 hours. Assembly. By 02:30, Lieutenant Richard Clark had assembled 23 paratroopers from different companies of the 502nd Regiment. None of them were where they were supposed to be. The planned drop zones were miles away, based on what landmarks they could identify. Clark was 24 years old, newly commissioned, and had never commanded in combat before. But he was the highest-ranking officer present, so command fell to him. "Gentlemen, we're somewhere north of Sainte-Mère-Église, probably 3 to 4 miles off target. Our objective was to secure the bridge at La Barquette, but that's at least 6 miles from here. We need to link up with battalion or at least find a defensible position." "Sir," Donnelly said, "I have radio contact with Division Artillery. SCR 300 is operational." "Excellent. Can you reach battalion?" Donnelly tried several frequencies on the SCR 300's 40-channel selector. The radio operated in the 40-48 MHz range, with 200 kHz spacing between channels. He rotated through channels, listening for battalion's call sign. Static, interference, fragments of other transmissions, hundreds of radios operating simultaneously in the invasion area, creating a chaotic electromagnetic environment. "Negative contact with battalion, sir, but I can reach Artillery Fire Direction Center. They're on a different frequency band." "Good enough. We'll move towards Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. It's on our way to the objective and should be lightly defended. If we run into trouble, you call in fire support." The mixed unit moved carefully through the Norman countryside. The bocage made navigation treacherous. Every field was a potential ambush site. They moved slowly, clearing each hedgerow before advancing to the next. Donnelly stayed near Clark, the SCR 300 weighing heavy on his back. The damaged antenna caught on branches twice, forcing him to stop and carefully extract it. Each time, his heart raced. If the antenna broke completely, the radio's effective range would drop from 3 miles to maybe 500 yards. Dawn approached. The eastern sky lightened from black to dark blue. They could see the village of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont ahead, perhaps a mile distant. Smoke rose from burning buildings. "We'll approach from the northeast," Clark decided. "Donnelly, can you get an exact position?" Donnelly pulled out his map and compared visible landmarks. Church steeple to the west, road junction to the south. Based on map coordinates, he estimated their position. "We're at approximately 493845 north, 1.2156 west, sir." Clark nodded. "Mark that. We might need fire support soon." They moved closer to the village. German voices carried across the morning air. The distinctive sound of MG-42 machine guns opening fire somewhere in the distance. The battle was heating up. At 0530 hours, as the group approached the village outskirts, they ran into German defenders. Part 4, June 6, 1944, 0540 hours, contact. The German position was well placed, a machine gun nest covering the main approach road, with riflemen in defensive positions behind a stone wall. Approximately 40 to 50 soldiers based on visible positions. The Americans took cover in a drainage ditch, 200 meters from the German line. Bullets snapped overhead. The MG-42 fired in its characteristic ripping canvas burst, impossibly fast, 6 rounds tearing through the air for every one that American machine guns could fire. "We can't flank them," Sergeant Williams reported. "They've got good fields of fire on both sides." Clark looked at Donnelly. "Can you get us artillery?" "Yes, sir." Donnelly unfolded his map on the muddy ground of the ditch. He identified their position and the German position. Using his compass and map coordinates, he calculated the target coordinates. German position, approximately 49.3712 north latitude, 1.2438 west longitude. He double-checked the calculation. Coordinates in military operations used a specific format, degrees and decimal minutes. If he called in those coordinates wrong, the 150mm howitzers several miles behind the lines would fire on the wrong location. Donnelly powered up the SCR 300's transmitter. The radio required several seconds to stabilize before transmitting the frequency calibration circuit needed to lock onto the correct channel. He keyed the handset. Fire Direction Center, this is Eagle 2-3. Fire mission over. Static interference. Then Eagle 2-3, this is FDC, send it. Grid reference 49er3712-12438. Enemy infantry in the open, approximately 50 personnel. Request he, battery fire. A long pause. Donnelly's heart pounded. Around him, paratroopers kept their heads down as German fire continued to rake their position. Eagle 2-3, confirm coordinates. Say again grid reference. Donnelly looked at his map. 49372, 1.2438. He keyed the handset again. FDC, coordinates are an explosion 40 meters away, through dirt and debris over the ditch. German mortar fire. The concussion made Donnelly's ears ring. He lost his place on the map for a second, looked down, saw the numbers, repeated them into the handset. But he was exhausted. 48 hours without sleep, adrenaline crash from the jump, the ringing in his ears. And in that moment of stress, his brain transposed the numbers. Grid reference 49er2438-13712. How copy? Good copy, Eagle 2-3. Fire mission confirmed. Time of flight 2 minutes. Donnelly signed off and looked at Clark. Artillery on the way, sir. 2 minutes. Outstanding. Everyone stay down. When those rounds hit, we assault through their position. The paratroopers prepared to attack. Donnelly refolded his map and secured it. The SCR-300 crackled with radio traffic as other units coordinated actions across the invasion area. 2 minutes. Donnelly counted seconds in his head. At 120 seconds, he heard the incoming rounds, the distinctive freight train whistle of 100 high explosive shells arcing through the sky. But the sound was wrong. The shells were landing to the right, too far right. Explosions erupted 800 meters away, not on the German position but in the fields beyond the village. Donnelly's blood turned to ice. What the hell? Clark stared at the explosions. Donnelly, what happened? Donnelly grabbed his map, hands shaking. He looked at the coordinates he'd written down. 49.372, 1.2438. That's what he'd calculated. Then he replayed in his mind what he'd actually transmitted, and he realized his mistake. He'd said 49.2438, 1.372, transposed digits, the two most critical numbers in the coordinate pair, reversed. Oh, God, his voice came out as a whisper. Sir, I gave them the wrong coordinates. What? I transposed the numbers. I sent them 49.2438, 1.372. That's not here. That's... He looked at the map, measuring the distance. That's about 1.5 kilometers southeast. Clark stared at him. You just called artillery fire on an empty field. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. God damn it, Donnelly. We needed that fire support. Now we're stuck here with no way to dislodge these krauts, except a frontal assault that'll get half of us killed. I can call another mission, sir. Give them the correct and waste another 5 minutes while they adjust? We don't have 5 minutes. Clark turned away, furious. Williams, we're going to have to assault. Pass the word. Fix bayonets. Donnelly sat in the ditch, stunned. He'd done the one thing he swore he'd never do. He'd made a mistake, and now men were going to die in a frontal assault because he couldn't transmit 6 numbers correctly. Around him, paratroopers checked their weapons and prepared to charge into German machine gun fire. Donnelly wanted to volunteer to lead the assault, to somehow make up for his failure, but his job was the radio. He had to stay back and coordinate any additional fire support. He'd failed at the one job he was supposed to be perfect at. Part 5, June 6, 1944, 06:15 hours, Discovery. The assault went badly. The Germans were well positioned and fought hard, but after 15 minutes of brutal close-quarters combat, the American paratroopers overwhelmed the defenders through sheer aggression and the shock of bayonet charges. 7 Americans wounded, 2 killed. Acceptable casualties for taking a defended position, But Clark was still furious with Donnelly. The radio operator sat against a stone wall, feeling hollow. He'd cost them the element of surprise. The artillery could have softened up the German position, made the assault easier, saved lives. But then Sergeant Williams found something in the German command post. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." Clark and several others gathered around Williams, who was holding German radio messages and tactical maps he'd pulled from a destroyed strongpoint. "These are movement orders," Williams said. He'd spent time in Germany before the war and could read German. "Panzer Reserve, 12 tanks. They were moving to—" He consulted the map, comparing it to the American map. "Grid reference 49.2438, 1.3712. Clark froze. "What did you say?" 49.2438, 1.3712. "That's the coordinates for—" "Wait." Williams looked at Donnelly. "Isn't that the coordinates you called artillery on?" Donnelly pulled out his map with shaking hands. He found the coordinates. 49.2438, 1.3712. Exactly what he'd transmitted. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's what I called in, by mistake." Williams continued reading the German messages. The Panzer column was moving through a wooded area to attack American positions from the flank, but they were hit by artillery fire at Scheisse. The timing matches. 05:42 hours. That's when your fire mission landed. "How badly were they hit?" Clark asked. Williams read through multiple messages. 12 tanks. The artillery caught them in column on a narrow road. No room to maneuver. Multiple direct hits. The messages report, "Jesus, all 12 tanks destroyed or damaged. The column is combat ineffective." Silence. Clark looked at Donnelly. "You're telling me those tanks were heading for us?" "According to this," Williams said, tapping the German tactical map, "they were supposed to hit the American paratroop positions in this sector starting at 06 hours, right about now." Donnelly did the math in his head. The German tank column would have struck Easy Company's position, where 127 American paratroopers were scattered in small groups trying to consolidate, with 12 Panzer IV medium tanks. The paratroopers had no anti-tank weapons heavy enough to stop panzers. They would have been slaughtered. "So let me get this straight," Clark said slowly. "You accidentally called artillery on the wrong coordinates, and those wrong coordinates happened to be exactly where a German tank column was moving, and you destroyed that tank column before it could hit us." "Yes, sir," Donnelly said. "But it was an accident. I transposed the numbers." "Did anyone ask if it was an accident?" "No, sir." Clark looked at the other paratroopers, then back at Donnelly. "Here's what happened, Private. You demonstrated exceptional initiative in analyzing the tactical situation. You identified a hidden enemy armor threat through careful observation and map reconnaissance. You then coordinated precision artillery fire to eliminate that threat, potentially saving hundreds of American lives. That's what happened. Understood?" Donnelly understood what Clark was saying. The lieutenant was giving him an out, was reframing the mistake as heroism. "But sir, I didn't—" "That's what happened, Donnelly. Now get that radio working. We're going to need more fire support before this day is done." Part 6, June 6th, Jan 30th, 1944. Aftermath. Word of Donnelly's initiative spread through the battalion. The story grew in the telling. The radio operator who'd spotted a German tank column and destroyed it with a single artillery call. The man who'd saved Easy Company. Donnelly tried to correct the record, tried to explain it was an accident, but no one wanted to hear it. Heroes were in short supply in the chaos of D-Day. The Army needed success stories, so Donnelly became one. Captain Wilson put him in for a Bronze Star for exceptional initiative in detecting and eliminating enemy armor through skillful coordination of artillery support fires. The medal came through in late June. At the small ceremony, Wilson pinned the bronze star on Donnelly's uniform and shook his hand. "Proud of you, son. You made a hell of a call under pressure." "Sir, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I didn't spot those tanks. I made a mistake. I transposed the coordinates. I was supposed to call fire on the German infantry position at 49,372, 1.2438. Instead, I called fire on 49,2438, 1.3712. Pure accident." Wilson looked at him for a long moment. "Does it matter?" "Yes, sir, it matters. I'm being decorated for an error." "You're being decorated because 127 men are alive, who might not be otherwise. The reason doesn't change the result." "But, Donnelly, listen to me. War is chaos. Half the brilliant decisions in history were accidents. The other half were luck. What matters is outcome. You got a good outcome. Take the medal. You earned it, even if you didn't earn it the way the citation says." But Donnelly couldn't shake the feeling that he was a fraud. Part 7, August 20th, 1944, the Falaise Pocket. 2 months later, Donnelly was still with Easy Company, still operating the SCR-300, still being careful never to make another mistake. The Allied forces had broken out of Normandy and were encircling German forces in the Falaise Pocket. Thousands of German troops were retreating in chaos, trying to escape before the trap closed. Easy Company was part of the forces closing the pocket. Their mission: block German retreat routes and call in artillery on enemy columns. At 14:30 hours, Donnelly spotted a column of vehicles moving on a road 3 kilometers away. Through binoculars, it looked like German trucks and armored vehicles trying to escape the pocket. "Lieutenant Clark, Donnelly, call it in. Let's hit them before they get away." Donnelly set up the SCR-300 and calculated coordinates. This time he triple-checked everything. Position: 48.8721, 0.2136. He transmitted: fire mission, grid reference 488721, 02136. Enemy convoy in the open, approximately 30 vehicles. Request HE battery fire. Confirmation came back. Fire mission approved. Time of flight, 90 seconds. The artillery landed perfectly, right on the coordinates Donnelly had provided. Explosions walked through the vehicle column, destroying trucks and scattering personnel. Mission accomplished, except 30 minutes later, a forward observer reached Easy Company's position, furious. "Who the hell called artillery on grid 48.8721, 0.2136? "I did," Donnelly said. "Enemy convoy? That wasn't an enemy convoy. That was French resistance fighters and civilians evacuating the combat zone. You just killed 14 friendlies." Donnelly felt his world tilt. The reconnaissance report said, "The reconnaissance report was wrong. The spotters confused French trucks with German trucks, but you didn't verify before calling fire," Clark intervened. "The error was in reconnaissance, not in radio transmission." Private Donnelly transmitted the coordinates he was given correctly. 14 people are still dead, the forward observer said. "Correct coordinates, wrong target." After the forward observer left, Donnelly sat with his back against a tree, staring at nothing. Clark sat next to him. "Not your fault, Private. I did everything right. I checked the coordinates 3 times. I transmitted perfectly, and 14 people died. Welcome to war. Sometimes doing everything right still gets people killed. That's the part they don't teach in training." Donnelly thought about D-Day. When he'd done everything wrong, transposed coordinates, failed the basic task, and saved 127 lives. Now he'd done everything right and killed 14 innocent people. "Sir, which is worse, being lucky or being good?" Clark didn't have an answer. Part 8, May 8, 1945, V-Day. The war in Europe ended. Donnelly survived 336 days of combat operations. He operated the SCR-300 in Normandy, Operation Market Garden, the Battle of the Bulge, and the final push into Germany. He called 243 artillery missions total. Of those, 241 were executed without error and achieved their intended effect. One was executed with error, transposed coordinates on D-Day, and accidentally achieved a better effect than intended. One was executed perfectly, Falaise pocket, and killed friendlies due to incorrect target identification. The mathematics were clear. He was a 99.6% accurate radio operator. But the two exceptions haunted him, because they taught him something he hadn't wanted to learn. Competence and outcome weren't the same thing. The Bronze Star sat in his duffel bag. He rarely looked at it. Epilogue, Chicago, 1948. Michael Donnelly worked at WCFL Radio for 3 years before a visitor changed his perspective. A young man walked into the station one day asking to see the radio operator who saved Easy Company on D-Day. Donnelly met him in the lobby. "Can I help you?" "You're Michael Donnelly, 502nd PIR?" "Yes." "I'm James Morrison, Private Eddie Morrison's younger brother." The name rang a bell. Eddie Morrison, Detroit, rifleman, killed during the assault on Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. One of the two men who died taking the German position after Donnelly's mistake meant they had no artillery support. "I'm sorry about your brother," Donnelly said quietly. "He was a good soldier. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me." "For what you did. The letter I got from Lieutenant Clark explained how you destroyed the German tank column before it could hit the company. He said Eddie and the others made it through D-Day because of your fire mission." Donnelly wanted to explain, wanted to say it was an accident, that Eddie had actually died because Donnelly's mistake forced a frontal assault. But looking at James Morrison, 20 years old, proud of his brother, grateful for a hero's story in the midst of grief, Donnelly understood something. The truth was complicated. Yes, he'd made a mistake. Yes, that mistake had accidentally saved 127 lives. Yes, Eddie Morrison had died anyway, but not because of the mistake, because war killed people regardless of mistakes or competence. And the 127 who lived, they were alive because of luck, accident, chaos, but they were still alive. Their families still had them. That counted for something. "Your brother was brave," Donnelly said. "He died taking a German strongpoint that needed to be taken. I wish my fire mission had helped him. I wish he'd made it home." "Me too, but thank you for trying. Thank you for being there." After James Morrison left, Donnelly returned to his control booth. He looked at the Bronze Star on the wall. He'd earned it through failure, through accident, through blind luck. But 127 men had gone home to their families because of that accident. Maybe that was enough. The 6 p.m. news approached. Donnelly's hand moved to the transmitter controls. He didn't hesitate this time. Pressed the switch exactly on time. Perfect execution. But he'd learned that perfect execution didn't guarantee good outcomes. And imperfect execution didn't guarantee bad ones. War taught brutal lessons. The hardest one was this: you could do everything right and still fail. You could do everything wrong and still succeed. The only thing you could control was trying. The outcome was up to fate, luck, chaos. Donnelly had tried. On D-Day, he'd failed. But his failure had saved an army. He could live with that.